All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. It's all right with everyone. All right, so hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for some coffee talk on your Friday. My name is Amanda, and I work at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society, also known as the IRI, at Columbia University in New York. And I help to manage a project called Act Today that's aiming to improve climate services for SDG 2. Currently, though, and very appropriately for this event, I am actually joining you from Ethiopia, the birthplace of coffee. This is what's in my background. Yeah, and so I'll be your moderator today for this very important conversation as we work our way through understanding the intersection of climate, coffee, and human rights together, right? So what do we have in store for you today? The conversation today is going to touch on quite a few themes and topics, including the impacts of climate on coffee, but also, what that means for both coffee consumers, those who enjoy their morning cup of coffee, as well as coffee producers. So the changing precipitation and temperature patterns that are associated with a shifting climate really do have huge implications for coffee, because as you may or may not know, coffee grows best in a rather narrow range of temperatures and conditions. And these changing conditions will not only affect coffee production or the quantity of coffee that we're able to produce, but it's also going to be affecting quality as well. And perhaps more importantly than even the effects on quality of coffee, these changes in conditions will and even already are affecting the quality of life of more than 100 million farmers around the world today who depend upon coffee for their livelihoods. So coffee is important for more reasons than just a tasty morning beverage. And by the end of the event, you should have a better understanding as to both why and how. But you don't have to take my word for it. We have an incredible panel with us today of researchers from the IRI, experts from both Fair Trade International and Fair Trade Africa, and even a coffee farmer herself from Kenya and the Kenya Fair Trade Certified Kipkelian Union. So we really have quite a diverse group of perspectives here to share their experiences with you all on how a changing climate has impacted their lives and work, as well as what can be done on a consumer, industry, and even policy level to affect change and address these challenges. So in a nutshell, there's trouble brewing, pun intended, but there's also some really nice and promising solutions out there. All right, so without further ado, we're going to start off the event with some very brief presentations from our panelists. We have 4 panelists, and the idea behind these presentations is just to give you a sense of who these panelists are, where they're coming from, and a bit about their organizations and work before we dive deeper into some of these issues in conversation. So each of these 4 presentations is going to be just about 5 minutes long, and then we're going to move into 30 minutes of actual panel discussion, followed by 20 minutes of taking and answering questions from you guys, the audience, before concluding the event. All right, so I guess we'll just get started. Our first presenter and panelist today is Juan Pablo Solis from Fair Trade International. Juan Pablo, who is Fair Trade International's Senior Climate Advisor, is going to give us a bit more background on the vulnerability of coffee to a changing climate and help us to understand that it's really not the only stressor that coffee farmers have to deal with, but it's a big one and it's an additional one. So he's also going to give us a quick snapshot of some of the solutions that Fair Trade International is promoting to address these challenges. So without further ado, Juan Pablo, you can go ahead and take it away.
Hi, Mada. Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words. Welcome. I'm going to share my screen now to start my conversation. Okay, hope you can see. Okay, so hi, my name is Juan Pablo Solis. I'm Senior Advisor for Climate and Environment here at Fair Trade International. And today we are going to talk about coffee, environment, climate, and human rights. Now, this issue is not new. We have experienced it during the last 5 years, according to the World Meteorological Organization, the 6 most warmed years on records. Actually, 2020 was one of the warmest ones. We also have seen the severity and frequency of meteorological events. A very recent example that touched on coffee was hurricanes Eta and Iota in Central America. And we have for years discussing about sustainability in our global agenda. The Sustainable Development Goals have a deadline in 2030, and if we look back, we are only 9 harvests away to achieve SDGs. So the clock is ticking. So for coffee, this is not something new. Actually, coffee has been a sector very resilient over time. Although, despite historical volatility in the price and the response of the market, the constant trend of market consolidation, and the imbalance between global income and value redistribution, coffee has been leading. Despite those things, coffee has been seen as one of the leaders in sustainability in general. No? Nonetheless, we have received some wake-up calls. 2012 was a year in which we realized that the conventional methods to overcome pests and diseases, especially the coffee rust in Latin America, was probably not able to contain the same methods, and we need some new actions. Most recently, the pandemic has also create some burdens, especially in the operational costs, logistics for shipping and trading coffee, but also have made us realize the importance of farmers and workers and how we should consider them also as essential workers. Now, although our knowledge is often incomplete, and this is a quote from the Coffee Barometer 2020, we should not stop ourselves. And something that I really like about this publication is uncertainty about the outcome is not a rationale for inertia. And that is why in Fairtrade, we are promoting different approaches to overcome these challenges, starting from developing and implementing climate action plans, what we call fair adaptation. So we work together with SPOs, smallholder producer organizations, to develop these climate action plans. We also stimulate discussions about sustainable farming methods and how to accelerate climate resilience. We are investing in climate change leadership schools, and my colleagues are going to talk more about this in the coming minutes. We are working closely on areas like living income, living wages, as standardized practice, also human rights and environmental rights due diligence, and Fairtrade carbon credits. We do that with 3 dimensions in mind. The first one is climate information. We have to take decisions based on evidence and increase our capacities to assess, evaluate, and mitigate risks, but also prevent the events before it happens. We also have to bear in mind that context matters. Each context is different. The same solution will not be suitable for all regions. We have to build that capacity based on our traditional knowledge and rooted that in the capacities of workers and producers. And we have to look beyond the farm, creating incentives and promoting more better education, training to accelerate the adoption of practices from a people, profit, planet perspective. Very short, but looking forward for the conversation. I'm going to stop here, but looking forward to engage later in the conversation. If you want to reach me, this is my email account, and looking forward.
Great, thanks so much, Juan Pablo. We're looking forward to hearing more about the solutions in the discussion part. Thanks for keeping it brief. Okay, so our next presenter and panelist is Juan Nicolas Hernandez Aguilera, also known as Nico. Nico is a colleague of ours at the IRI, and he's working on the Adapting Agriculture to Climate Today for Tomorrow project, also known as ACT Today, that aims to provide decision-relevant climate information to address hunger, food security, nutrition, and sustainable agriculture, also known as SDG 2. So, although coffee is not a food crop per se, like wheat or maize, the income from its production really does play a significant role in the food security of many communities, including Ethiopia, where he's been working with myself and also other partners to develop a dynamic advisory tool called My Coffee Farm. So I don't want to steal Nico's thunder, but yeah, this advisory tool helps farmers and those who support them to make climate-informed decisions and understand the impacts of specific climate events on their pockets and profits. So without further ado, you can go ahead and start, Nico.
Thank you, Amanda. I just want to confirm that you are seeing the full screen.
Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, well, thank you for this opportunity to connect and to discuss this relevant topic and ask this question is response to this question is climate change putting coffee at risk? But I think more importantly also, what does it mean for coffee, for a coffee farmer? So, as you know, coffee is produced in what we call the coffee belt between the tropics that provide these optimal conditions that are a combination of elevation, temperature, rainfall, distance to the equator, soil conditions. And all of these conditions affect attributes like yields, quality, and exposure to pests. Coffee species do not tolerate large changes in seasonality and do not flourish in very hot conditions. Besides, coffee requires well-distributed rainfall patterns. Elevation is also, as I mentioned, an important factor. For every 100 meters, temperature decrease on average by 0.6 degrees Celsius. And therefore, you can observe that in some regions that have higher elevations and in these tropical zones, you have the cool environments that offer those optimal conditions. Now, studies predict in general that suitable coffee cultivation area could drop by 50% by 2050. And these models actually assume a specific representative concentration pathways for RCPs. And what are these RCPs? Basically, it's a summarized greenhouse gas concentration trajectory adopted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Those RCPs actually also underline specific socioeconomic pathways that reflect human activity and consequently specific greenhouse gas concentrations. And RCP6 in particular, that predicts that 50% of land will disappear for coffee production, assume that this greenhouse gas concentration peak at 2080, and between 2046 and 2065, the temperature increase around 1.3 degrees Celsius. In general, all of these scenarios implies that it is expected an altitudinal migration of suitable cultivation areas to cooler regions, so basically the highlands. There is limited scope for a latitudinal migration because of the inability to tolerate seasonal temperature changes. The coffee is not, it's sensible, as we mentioned, to those changes. And Arabica and Robusta's limited ability to adapt means that both species will be grown in less suitable climate conditions that also affect exposure to diseases. Now, for some specific cases and regions, there are some works that predict that, especially in Ethiopia, suitable land will disappear between 65 to 38%. Well, there are a lot of studies with different predictions. So I think that despite these different models and prediction, still at this point, there is a significant gap, and you only can have this kind of generalizations that of course are important and provide the long-term picture. But at this point, some questions remain. So what scenario should we consider? If I'm a farmer, what is the scenario that I should trust? Regardless of these scenarios, all of those scenarios agree on the same conclusion. Climate change is definitely a threat. But how farmers and producers can use this information? What means for me as a producer that 50% of land is going to disappear? I'm in, I'm out. Is there any coping strategy that I could implement? And these are the kind of questions that probably can be summarized in these general questions. How does long-term scenarios and research affect and inform smallholders, farmers today? And this is very aligned with the Columbia Work Projects, an initiative that tried to mobilize the university research and scholars to tackle today global challenges. And one of the major Columbia Work Projects is Act to Date, that actually is focused on this coffee belt area. And 4 of those Act to Date countries actually are main coffee players, and coffee constitute the main or one of the main sources of income for rural areas and even for the whole country in those countries like Ethiopia, Vietnam, Guatemala, and Colombia. So there have been important advances, and a first big step refers to the generation and improvements in seasonal and subseasonal climate models made by climate scientists at the IRI that produce and generate weather and climate forecasts at timescales of weeks or years that provide information that is more, adaptable to the needs of farmers. In particular, NextGens provide both spatial maps with the deterministic values and probabilities of exceed a particular threshold and the entire probability distribution function once a location is selected. This model actually can be combined with the Enhancing National Climate Services initiative, which provide high-resolution historical meteorological databases, especially and temporarily combining stations and satellite information. Actually, ENACT is now over 22 countries, primarily in Africa, and is one of the IRI's most important and impactful initiatives to date. In summary, we are generating relevant climate information at the spatial and temporal resolution which is required. However, if we really want to go beyond and want to adopt an approach that is not only restricted to the generation of climate and forecasts, we need to focus on what is called climate services. And those climate services initiatives include 3 additional dimensions, which refer to translate, transfer, and use that information. But how it actually, what is this in reality? So generate can be associated to these climate models, right? And the use basically inform decision making. But let's focus in 2 dimensions, translate and transfer. So a condition for translate, it's basically find a common language. And this common language is not only about the metric system, it's how climate information affect production practices and how those practices actually affect the cost of production and the profitability of farmers. That is probably one of the major sustainability threats. And regarding the media, what is the most effective way to reach millions of farmers with this kind of information? So let's start briefly with the media. Digital tools and mobile services represent an enormous opportunity to reach millions of farmers. Among the poorest 20% in low and middle income countries, 70% have access to mobile phones and 1 in 3 people has internet access. Although connectivity prevails in urban settings, it has been progressively spread to rural areas where the ratio of farmers to extension workers exceed 1,000 to 1. So there is a lot of potential with these tools. Actually, the 2021 GSMA Mobile for Development Foundation's report emphasized that tools intended to enable more climate-smart farming and help farmers to respond to variable rainfall and temperatures have a high potential, although investments in this kind of tools is still low to moderate. However, digital tools implementation and use is not a simple task, and there are many challenges that actually we are sharing now in this link and this document that you can observe. So just focus in the particular case of an example of Ethiopia. According to the Ethiopia State Minister, there are 140 digital services provided in Ethiopia, but the use is low. Existing tools tend to generate information that is not decision relevant to the smallholders. And many times the design of the tools is without including Ethiopia's substantial agricultural extension networks and farmers. In our team, one of our members of our team, Ryan Copper, has actually made an interesting assessment of the different tools that exist with coffee tool purposes. And they cover different areas. They cover climate, change management, and other kind of aspects. But I think that the big warning and message here is that the development of those digital tools evolve quicker than its use. Why is behind the low use of these tools? Well, we need to go in more detail on these tools. We also did this analysis of the current tools, and I think that a very interesting example and a very interesting tool is this tool, Acclimatar, developed by HRNS and SEAT, which use current 30 and 50-year temperature and rainfall location-based prediction and use machine learning to provide a degree of adaptation and suggesting practices to enhance resilience among farmers, especially in Central America. Now, acclimatarians focused on climate change instead of climate variability and lacks a direct relationship with the specific production processes and practices at the farm level that will tailor adaptation strategies. So still, we need to improve the common language of those tools. And this is what basically we're doing with my coffee farm. So UpToDate team is developing an on-farm advisory tool that integrates that historical climate information with economic data. So we are translating that climate information and forecasts and predictions to implications on the production process. And climate risk and production cost estimations are based on the characteristics and the production practices at each farm in different agroecological zones. We use as a base for this work an initial work that we did to assess the sustainability in economic terms, use cost of production. But basically what we have now is that if we have a particular climate event, we can define specific threshold criteria that actually are informed by all of these climate models and see what are the implications on specific activities and specific inputs for a particular farmer. And not only that, but how this climate event not only translate to specific practices, but also what are the adaptation strategies and how these adaptation strategies actually respond in a specific way to those climate events. So in conclusion, what are the future steps? Is climate change putting coffee at risk? Yes, it is. All long-term climate models suggest and conclude that. What does it mean for a coffee farmer? Basically, uncertainty. Moreover, current global scenarios, forecasts, and advisory tools per se are insufficient to reduce that uncertainty. Are required, they provide the long-term picture, but are not sufficient. It is essential to have farmers and local organizations at the core of the diagnosis and the design of adaptation strategies. With my coffee farm, we continue connecting frontier knowledge of climate scientists with farmers' collective intelligence and needs. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you all the participants. I'm looking forward for your questions.
Thank you so much, Nico. Yeah, it's a good point. You can have the absolute, best quality climate information out there, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be accessed and used if it's not in the right format or tailored to different decision makers like those in the coffee sector. Yeah, and another problem is, like you mentioned, is these scenarios are longer term, 50 to 100 years, but that's not the horizon that people make decisions on. We need information that's more in the nearer term. So thanks for giving us that overview. All right, so we've of course heard from Fair Trade International from a global perspective, as well as the IRI from a research and application perspective in Ethiopia. And for our next presentation, we're going to hear from Bernard Njoroge, who is Fair Trade Africa's Senior Project Officer for Coffee, on what kind of work Fair Trade is doing in this space, and particularly related to the Climate Academy work in Kenya. All right, Bernard, feel free to start.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Pablo and Nicholas, for the presentations that you have given. My name is Bernard Njoroge. I work with Fair Trade Africa, a Senior Program Officer, and I implemented the Climate Academy project. Officially it's called the Coffee Industry Program. I cannot see my presentation. I request that you share it. I hope the others are able to see it. I'm not seeing it.
Sorry, I'm trying to share it. Let me give it another go here.
Thank you. Can go to the second slide. Yeah, so the Climate Academy project was designed to enhance resilience to coffee farmers to climate change and its impact. It was implemented to 5 producer organizations in Kenya, and this reached or targeted 6,452 males and 3,300 women in the 5 producer organizations. Go to the next slide. So as we have been told by Nicholas, usually coffee thrives in a very narrow range of climatic condition. That is the temperature, the rainfall. These are the conditions that usually enhance the flowering and all the other physiological conditions that are needed in coffee. And therefore, farmers, we realized, have been experiencing problems with climate change, which includes to increased temperature. And this affects the flowering. And once the flowering has been affected, of course, it means that the production will be affected. Therefore, production losses were experienced by farmers due to increased temperatures. Pests and diseases was another problem. And these are pests and diseases that occurred because of change in the climatic conditions, change in temperature or maybe change in rainfall. Of course, they affected as well the flowering and production became less because of the pests and diseases. Reduced rainfall was another issue, which brought drought, famine, and production losses. In general, what you're saying is that climate change usually bring loss of livelihood, because once the farmers don't get the required production, they don't get the expected income and livelihood of the farmers. The dignity of the coffee farmers is as well affected. The next slide. The next slide. Hello. The next slide. Okay, so what are some of the impacts of climate change? You have gone far. Okay, go. Yeah. What are some of the impacts of climate change? Mostly, what you would see to the coffee tree are diseases, pests, and as you can see on the extreme left, we have a healthy coffee plant, a coffee tree with very good production, and on the upper half of that quadrant, we have two diseases: the coffee berry disease, and the coffee berry disease usually come when you experience rain, and especially in the afternoon, then followed by low temperatures. The disease that mostly attack the coffee tree is the coffee berry disease. And if it rains maybe in the morning or in mid-morning, and then followed by warm weather or higher temperatures, then the coffee may have leaf rust. Then if we have a prolonged dry period during the berry growing period, or even without berry, we'll have thrips, as you can see on the lower left quadrant, and on the right lower quadrant. If we have persistent drought, we have the entire crop being affected, as you can see, water-stressed coffee on the farm. Go to the other slide. So the Climate Academy, go to the other slide. The Climate Academy addressed the challenges by having several interventions. And one of the things that we did is to create awareness to the farmers. And the farmers were able to understand what is climate change. We would have situation where the farmers didn't know what climate change is. They would say that maybe this is the hand of God. They would give any definition that they had, but they, after the training that we did and the awareness, they were able to know what is real climate change and how do the farmers contribute to climate change, and other industries to climate change. And they were able as well to know how climate change impact on their livelihood. We did risk and opportunity analysis with the farmers to understand the risks that are posed by climate change, and then what opportunities are there that the farmers can employ so that they reduce the impacts of climate change. The other slide. So the interventions that we did mainly were on sustainable agricultural land management practices, on energy, and economic diversification. So some of the examples of the sustainable agricultural land management practices we did is on having shade trees to the coffee And therefore, we had several nurseries to the different POs, producer organization that we were implementing the project with. And we were able to give to the farmers over 50,000 of seedlings to shade coffee. And of course, we have seen the changes that the shading has done, and especially to where we implemented the project first. Then we had a demo training. We established demo fields where farmers were able to be trained through the peer learning and having field schools. And these demo trainings were on various thematic areas that were realized are very important through the risk and opportunity analysis that we did with the farmers. And therefore, we had trainings on soil and water management, how to control the diseases, how to manage the coffee to increase the productivity. As you can see in the next slide, that this is a coffee that is well mulched, and you can see the production is good because the soil is able to retain water for a longer period of time, and this helps in the growth of the crop. Therefore, this was one of the adaptation strategy that we employed among many other strategies under the sustainable agricultural land management practice to see that the increased production that will be realized after employing these adaptation strategies will help the farmers increase their productivity and income at the farm level. Go to the other slide. The other intervention was on sustainable energy solutions. And one thing that we realized is that at least above 90% of the household used, got their energy from firewood. And they were using the traditional 3-stone energy stoves to cook, which uses a lot of firewood. And we realized that trees were cut by farmers to provide the energy as well as other needs in the household. And therefore, the intervention on energy was hardy, and we helped the farmers and we skilled the farmers to construct the improved cook stove. And as well, we had others that we were able to buy from artisans outside the project and gave to the farmers. And these cook stove were able to reduce the energy need by around 60%. Then 4 of the producer organization that are in the central rift of the country, we realized that they had a lot of cattle, and therefore in 2 producer organizations, we were able to implement the biogas units to especially to the women households. And this biogas came and assisted beyond even how the project was designed, because it helped the farmers to increase the milk production, and therefore it added another income stream to the household. And as well, it provided manure from one of the products, a byproduct of the biogas. As you can see, this is a woman who is happily using biogas to do the cooking in her house, and therefore she is able to have more time to attend to other economic activities in the farm other than looking for firewood, which was taking a lot of time. The other slide. And then the other intervention was on income diversification, and we had several income diversification. For example, the beekeeping, the poultry, women were provided with tents. We were able to provide to do horticultural activities as income diversification activities. So it depended on every PO what they were able to do and what they are able to support within their region. So basically, the Climate Academy looked at the the problems and the impact that are brought by climate change, and the interventions that were able to be maybe where we would give the knowledge, and that knowledge could be transferred to other farmers and other producer organizations, not only here in Kenya, even across to other countries that are within the region. And what the major outcome that we realized is the climate guide, which is a document that the farmers can easily read and implement the activities that the runnings that were seen from the Climate Academy. So thank you very much. I am looking forward to give more details on what we did through the Climate Academy, the runnings that we got. And I want to take it back to you, Amanda.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bernard. Yeah, we talk about climate research, but there's actually a ton of knowledge out there in the field with coffee farmers themselves. So I'm really glad to see the peer-to-peer learning that's going on and these other solutions you mentioned. Okay, so our last panelist, it's my pleasure to introduce Zedi Rodic, who is a coffee producer from Kenya's Fair Trade Certified Kipkelian Union. And Zedi will be speaking about the Growing Women in Coffee project in which she was involved and has now begun spreading to other communities in the region. So Zedi, you can feel free to start. Zedi, are you with us? Zedi might have some problems connecting. Okay. So if Zedi can't connect at this moment, we can try to come back to her when she is able to connect. But in the meantime, I think we'll try to move into the questions component, and we'll give Zedi an opportunity to share and speak if and when she can join again. So, okay, let's move into some of the panel discussion. I'm going to ask the panelists to please turn their cameras on if they are not on already. I will also turn on my video. Okay, all right, great. Thanks so much. All right, so when people think about the impacts of climate change, you know, they're often talking about the future, although in fact the impacts of a changing and varying climate are actually already being felt today. We could see that in some of Bernard's slides. So every person on this panel is either works with coffee farmers or even is a coffee farmer herself. So the question is this, and I see that Zedi's connected again, so maybe she can answer this first. The question is, in your own personal experience, research or work, how have you seen climate impacting coffee production and coffee producers themselves? You know, what does that actually look like on the ground? So hi, Zedi.
Hi.
Hi. So yeah, we were hoping you could explain you know, more about the Growing Women in Coffee project you were involved with. And then I was just asking a question about, you know, how have you seen climate impacting coffee yourself, you know, as a coffee producer?
Yes. Thank you, Amanda. I'm Zedi Rotich. I'm a coffee farmer from Kapngetwin Farmers Cooperative Society. I'm a board member to Women in Coffee Association. I'm also the treasurer to the Specialty Zawadi Coffee Roasters Limited. And I'm a coffee farmer. I own 300 coffee bushes that were gifted to me by my husband. And these enable me to be a member of Kapngetwin FCS. I have a membership number. I also have a coffee account. This enable me to be a member together with other women who are members of the same association. Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
Yes. Through the Climate Academy, we have been taught on the good agricultural practices. We can do it ourselves as women. We have been trained on how to prune coffee, how to make manure and also apply to the coffee. We can make a compost manure and apply to the coffee. We've also been taught on how to conserve soil and also water by making terraces. You have asked me on the impact of climate change. This one has impacted, and everyone else has felt the impact of climate change, especially to the coffee farmer. Climate change has impacted on coffee so much that we are beginning to realize low coffee production. The flowering, which was supposed initially would take place twice in a year, that is between the months of April and also August. Flowering now is taking place throughout the year because of the warm temperatures. So yeah, because of the warm temperatures. Another impact of climate change on coffee is that currently the coffee produced is of low quality because the coffee ripen immaturely. Hello?
Hello, we can hear you still.
Yes.
Yeah, this is great.
However, we have tried to mitigate on this through the Climate Change Academy. For example, I want to talk as me, Zedi, to the solution of energy. I have biogas, which I use for cooking. At the same time, I also use solar for lighting my house. And I have also diversified on income because the process from the coffee comes once in a year and it is waited for so long. So there is need for diversification, and I've done the same. I have poultry. I do poultry farming. I also have some dairy cows where I get the products from chicken, like eggs, I sell them. And I also sell milk from my cows and get some income. I also have a kitchen garden. That means I have food security, and the surplus from my kitchen garden, I sell. We use organic manure, especially I use organic manure on my kitchen garden because I get the bioslurry. I get the bioslurry, which is a very good manure. I apply on my kitchen garden, and the vegetables are doing so well. It is a very nice organic manure. Now, I want to talk shortly about the impact of climate change, though I have talked about it, that we have felt the impact of climate change, like we have a prolonged dry spell, and women feel it most than men. Why? I want to explain that sometimes there is a very prolonged dry spell, so acute that even the rivers and streams dry up they dry. And these women move to very long distances looking for water. That is why I'm saying that it is the women who are feeling the impact of climate change more than the men. It is also the women who go very far looking for firewood, especially those who don't have the biogas units. So they go looking for firewood, they go into the forest, and that one means it is the destruction of forests, which are very important as sinks for carbon dioxide. We have also experienced some food shortage at some time when the dry spell prolongs so much. And it may be acute to such an extent that there is famine. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Zedi. Appreciate that. Yeah, it sounds like, these impacts are certainly being felt. And, you mentioned the flowering stage, which is one of the most vulnerable stages for coffee that's being affected by climate and particularly temperature changes. And thank you as well for describing, the income diversification. That is an adaptation strategy. In addition to, the water conservation measures you talked about, sometimes an adaptation strategy is that you diversify your income towards other things because, you know, your main source of income is, you know, being threatened, of course. So thank you for sharing that experience and especially highlighting that, you know, these impacts are not just even across the board, that they're actually impacting some people. Of those people are women. So thanks so much, Zeddy.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you. I also wanted to ask this question to Nico. You know, in your experience and research, you know, how have you seen or, you know, researched or you know, seen in the literature, you know, climate impacting coffee production and coffee producers? I think Nico shared a bit of evidence from his presentation, actually.
Yeah. Well, Amanda, first of all, I really enjoy Bernard and Zeddy's presentation. And I think that these connect very well and with what we are talking about, and is that we have good science out there. We have improvements, amazing improvements in the possibilities to connect with farmers, but we need to make that connection stronger and better. So that thing that is happening at the research perspective, which is the side that I'm working now, and that knowledge that is you know, shared by communities and that is reinforced through these initiatives like these climate academies, and all of this knowledge has to connect at some point, not only to inform general practices, but even to provide more customized recommendations according to the economics and the particular conditions and the specific context of each farmer. So all of those practices that you were mentioning also need to be translated and connected with the forecast modeling and with all the science that is happening. And I think that this is, I mean, the conditions are there. And I was mentioning incredible tools that are outside. I think that also on that path, we need to work on what has been done and not replicate things, but actually take advantage of potential partnerships and alliance that take advantage of knowledge and shared knowledge to move on that direction in a more systematic way, and to improve the advice and that connection between the global conditions and the farm conditions. So I think that, yeah, eventually research generate pathways, even guide policies, and it's important to have both perspectives linked and connected.
Okay, great. Yeah, I agree. And thank you, Nico, for that. So the next question I'm going to ask, and Zeddy actually did answer part of this from the gender lens, is, you know, are the impacts of climate on coffee that we all have just been talking about, are they being disproportionately felt by some farmers, for example, women or smallholders, or areas of the world? I'm thinking, you know, Africa or developing countries more than others. Are these impacts being felt evenly, or are there some people or some areas that are feeling these impacts more than others? And then, you know, what are the implications of that for a morning cup of coffee, and what are the implications of that for social justice? And I don't know, I was thinking maybe Bernard, you could perhaps discuss, you know, this problem affecting, you know, African countries or smallholders who are, you know, particularly vulnerable, and what this means for their livelihood. I don't know if you want to expand on these things.
Okay. I think I would say yes. I would say that it is yes and a no, depending on how you look at it. Number one, everybody is feeling the effect, the impact of climate change, because here at the production level, what we need is good production that will assure the farmers a good income. And at the consumption level, what the consumers need is a cup of coffee, and of course, a cup of coffee that is made from quality beans. And therefore, if the coffee is not available, then the cup will be more costly. But on the other hand, I would say from maybe some publication that I have read, that the consuming world may be having ability to buy not everyone may be able to understand what the farmers are experiencing. And that is one area where the disproportionate impact may come in. Then looking at the production systems that we have, the smallholders will feel the impact of climate change more than the large-scale holders, because the resources are not the same. The smallholders do not have the resources to adapt and mitigate climate change. They don't have the resources to do irrigation. They do not have even enough money, or if they are not earning from the income realized from their farm, to maybe educate their children, the income maybe for good health, and therefore the impact to the smallholders is more. Remember, most of the smallholders, at least over 80%, rely on weather, and therefore, when there is climate change, they are not able to have artificial, maybe application of water or maybe interventions, because they do not have the resources. Then Zebe has put it very well about the gender. Now, when there is prolonged drought, and especially here in Africa, in Kenya especially, the woman or the females, the mothers will feel it more than their male counterparts, because naturally they are the nurturers of their family. In Kenya, it's the women, and especially in where we are implementing the project, the women are the ones who go to look for firewood. They look for water, and therefore, if the rivers cannot supply the water that is needed at household, if the water sources dry up, it is the women who will go far to look for those resources. If there is no firewood within the around their household, it's the women who will go far. Therefore, depending on how you look at it, I would say actually there's a lot of disproportionate impact. And but on the other hand, everybody, those that are consuming coffee, those that are producing coffee, those that are in supply chain, they feel the impact of change, where you consider the issues of quality and where you consider the issues of quantity. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that really, really detailed answer from Bernard. So yeah, we've seen that, this is going to affect women more than men. This is certainly going to affect smallholders who have, less resilient capacity. And yeah, I want to ask Nico as well if he has anything to add, on this question about whether the impacts are going to be felt unevenly. Yeah.
Sure. I want to emphasize Bernard's point of resources and the investments required. And the relationships are in some way clear, but we need to quantify, we need to translate these to numbers, not only to inform farmers, but even to inform NGOs and all the industry and stakeholders, the coffee stakeholders, about what are the concrete steps in order to move forward. So that's why we insist in the translation of all of this climate information to concrete and specific numbers, quantities, and even amounts of money required to make those investments. And definitely the social impact of coffee is clear. 80% of this product is produced by smallholders in countries that are affected by violence, that are affected by hard economic situations. And the dynamics that are happening there are not only have implications for those countries, but global consequences. So one of these links that, of course, has a lot of sides, but definitely climate worse the situation could be migration, right? A lot of farmers that don't have the opportunities and don't see possibilities there. So it is important to, once again, and I insist and clarify those connections, those links, and those resources that Bernard is talking about to effectively find strategies, and not only theories about the potential impacts of climate change, because actually it's happening and it's affecting lives.
Yeah, that's certainly right. Thank you, Nico. Yeah, and one note I also want to add, just related to Ethiopia, because that's where I work, is that Ethiopia is the cradle of genetic diversity for Arabica coffee, And so, you know, when we talk about climate impacting coffee in Ethiopia, it's very serious, especially in terms of safeguarding genetic diversity, which we haven't mentioned to this point. So I do want to mention that point as well. So I want to move on to our next question, and it's related to social justice. All right. So Fair Trade has just released a report on human rights violations in global supply chains, including that of coffee. We can try to put the link in the chat. But in that report, there is a quote by former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who has said, climate change is intrinsically linked to public health, food and water security, migration, peace, and security. It is an issue of social justice, human rights, and fundamental ethics. Okay, so I want to ask the Fair Trade team, what exactly are the human rights violations and issues at play in the coffee supply chain right now? And how is climate change making these issues better or worse? So I think, yeah, either Juan, Pablo, or Bernard can try to answer these.
Sure, maybe I can start and Bernard can jump in. And thank you for the question and realizing this. Maybe we have to start by putting the elephant in the room, and is that the market is not functioning in the way it should, or in a fair way. No? And if you look back the statistics of coffee, you see that the global value of international coffee trade represents between 200 to 150 billion US dollars per year, but only 10% of that stays as a value created in producing regions. And in those producing regions, I'm also incorporating the big ones, no? Brazil, Vietnam, no? The big producers. And if you go one step further and look into the statistics, how much of that is reinvested in sustainability is 0.00 something. No, it's very minimum. The real contribution of the entire market, the entire value generated annually. That comes back to why we are trapped in this. Each context is different. Yes, I mentioned that in my presentation. The politics matters, the culture matters, the way we can create more resilient approaches also matters. The governance, for instance, and the support of local governments in promoting better adaptation measures matters. And as we have said, finance also matters. But what we are seeing is that if the market doesn't respond, then this type of sectors, coffee, the biggest example, it's in a way being subsidized by poverty. And this is the first, the strongest burden that smallholder farmers are confronting. A friend of mine used to say that it's kind of a, if you're poor, you're more competitive, something like that, no? And that tends to move in the different contexts of the regions, and you can see cases where children don't go to school, but because they need some sort of labor in the farm, and that is a violation of the right of the children to be educated. Or you can also see cases where forest is being cut off to increase the extension of land because productivity is not enough. So you have to increase lands and go into the forest, causing deforestation, which is another violation. You can see these cases of forced labor and not right conditions for workers, which is another violation. As Nico was saying, in some cases, people is forced to migrate because they cannot see a living condition in their cities and in their communities. No? So all these aspects needs to be incorporated, and also that is why Fairtrade will try to move one step beyond to understand those risks and come up with remediation analysis created due diligence that is required to understand and prevent and avoid that this type of human rights violations happens. And the other strategy that is very strong in our areas of work is try to stimulate discussions around what is the living income of a farmer, what should be the benchmark We do have a minimum fair trade price for our products, and we know that sometimes that's not enough. So we have to reestablish these conversations about traders and producers to establish benchmarks that allows a living income and a dignity livelihood for farmers. I don't know if Bernard, what you want to add and complement my words.
Yeah, I think Pablo, you have said it very well. And maybe to echo what you have said, I will base it on something I read from Ghanaian business news for March this year. And it was written that in 2014, Africa exported coffee worth $6 billion. And the same coffee was value added and it was worth $100 billion. So you can see there is a social injustice that the producer who is investing a lot, including sacrificing himself and herself, is earning very little. And sometimes the legal systems that we have in the source countries for coffee encourage that, because sometimes they do not encourage the value addition and the consumption of coffee maybe at home. But whatever the case, whether we have consumption at home or we don't have consumption at home, I believe it is the responsibility of the entire value chain, right from the production to the consumption, to make sure that everyone benefits from the coffee, from the entire chain, that the farmer needs to feel dignified by good income that comes from coffee. And it is the responsibility of the value chain that are above the farmers to see that they eliminate or they give good payments to the farmers. In most cases, and especially here in Kenya, the farmers do not decide how much their coffee is going to cost. And therefore, they do not have much say. Well, the system is changing, and I want to thank what the trainings and the sensitization that Fair Trade is doing to the farmers, so that the farmers are enlightened of what they need to do, so that at least they feel that coffee is giving good value to them. But however, the supply chain needs to be evaluated and checked, and Fair Trade need to come in and see how will the farmers feel that surely coffee is a crop that is able to remunerate them well. Yes, Fair Trade Premium is one of the tools that is supposed to address that. And I think the market need to be encouraged that they need to uptake more of fair trade coffee in fair trade terms. Because in the country, for example, here in Kenya, about 20% of all the production is the one that is sold at the fair trade terms. The rest is not sold at the fair trade terms. And therefore, I think that there is that social injustice, because once the farmers are economically handicapped because of what they are doing, then they will be demotivated. And we have seen it. Some of the farmers, there are some farmers who have uprooted their coffee trees because they feel it is not yielding enough. Now, when we have climate change, then the problem is even becoming more, that the market is not able to address some of the farmers' needs. And then the climate change as well complicates the problem by reducing the production and the quality that the farmer of the coffee that the farmer is putting on the market. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for those answers from both of you. For our last question, it's about solutions. You know, we've been talking a lot about the problem. We've been talking a little bit about solutions. But this last question is about, you know, what can be done, and some people have asked, you know, in the Q&A as well, what can be done on an individual policy or industry level to address these issues? And what do you see, if you had to choose, what do you see as the single biggest gap standing in the way of adaptation for coffee farmers? Is it awareness, education, tools, research, policy? Is it some of these things, all of these things, some more than the other? So it's a question I'd like all of our panelists to answer, but if they can, try to keep your answer a bit brief, because there are, 3 or 4 questions we'd like to answer from the audience as well. I don't know who wants to take it away first. What is the single biggest gap or challenge standing in the way of adaptation for coffee farmers, in your opinion?
If I may, I can start, and maybe my colleagues can jump in. But all the environmental leaders agree more or less that there are 3 main things that we have to bear in mind. To overcome climate change, we need an institutional reform, try to understand how are our institutional norms, mobilize more resources to invest and pay for the transition, because as Nico said, and also Bernard said, and Seri, farmers cannot take from all the burden, the financial burden. And the third is using nature to deal with the climate challenges and the biodiversity challenges. No? Diversification of income, nature-based solutions. These are things that we can stimulate, but again, we need to do that in a new institutional framework and mobilizing the resources for doing so. If anyone can jump into, be pleased to be in the discussion.
Yeah, I agree with Juan Pablo. And I'm sorry, Bernard, go ahead.
Bernard, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't want to add to say to repeat what Pablo has said, but I think amongst the producers, the peer learning or the field schools or awareness has yielded results, and I would say beyond the producers, I think this awareness should as well go to along the supply chain to the consumers, because the big question is the consuming world aware of what is happening? Maybe there's somebody who can afford the cup, but so that they're able to support in bridging this gap, I think awareness should be made across the entire supply chain, so that that obligation and that responsibility will be there across the supply chain to see that everybody is supported. The producers are supported, the transporters, the entire supply chain, the roasters, the blenders, and even the consumers, so that this cup will always be available and the producers will be happy at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and actually, I was planning to mention that aspect as well, Bernard, of the consumers and all the stakeholders in the value chain, that awareness that is required. And also, I was mentioning during my presentation the importance of media. That media can be used as well as a way to improve that communication channel, that transparency between the different stakeholders, and also emphasize that the solutions are context-based. So there can be some recommendations as the use of shade-grown coffee and so on, but the economic and the market conditions has to be clear in order to facilitate those transitions. And yeah, that's, I think, that more the most specific things related with your question, Amanda.
Great. All right, so unless anyone else wants to add to that, I think we can try to get to some of these questions in the chat. There's been a few more in the last few minutes. So we'll start with a question from Francesco from the IRI. The question is, what do the panelists think are the most important considerations for consumers or addicts, such as himself, when making decisions about coffee beans that he or we can buy for home use? He also asks Zeddy if it's possible to buy her beans in the US, for those interested in supporting women smallholder farmers, for example. Fair trade or Nico, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think that, this is a very important question. Actually, we recently published a paper when we were basically trying to understand how consumers were aware of some labels that actually communicate to consumers some support that farmers can receive for fair trade practices or conservation practices, or even for particular production systems like shade-grown coffee that provide habitat for migratory birds. And consequently, there is this label, the Smithsonian Bird Friendly. And for our surprise, many consumers are not aware of this kind of traditional market instruments to communicate that support to farmers. So I think that it's important to improve the knowledge of this, but not only traditional ways to do it. I think that I want to emphasize, as we were mentioning, that media and new ways to communicate can also improve that process. And also there is a lot of consumers that once they understand all of those connections, all those interactions, want to definitely support farmers and practices that contribute to the solution. So I will basically summarize in improve education and awareness at the consumer side, as Bernard was mentioning, and also use the use of new ways and new media and new technologies to improve traceability and transparency in the whole value chain.
Great, thanks for that. Thanks for response, Nico.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Pablo.
Can add, yes.
Yeah, no, just to make it very simple, and also with my hat of coffee addict, just ask yourself where this coffee comes from. What is the origin? How it was produced? How is ended up in the cup in front of me? As a consumer, asking that is a very first step to move ahead.
Great. Yes, being conscious of those things is really very important. Okay, so there's another interesting question in the chat. I'm not sure if, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, there was a question that you asked. It has not been answered. Whether it is possible to get the coffee from the women.
Yeah, and women.
Yes, yes. Maybe I can support Zedi to answer that, and I'll say yes. We through Fair Trade Africa and as well through the society, the cooperative that is supporting the women in coffee. You can get that coffee. It is grown by women and processed by women, and therefore it's purely women coffee. Therefore, it is possible. We are as well supporting the Zawadi women to value add their coffee, and therefore very soon there will be roast that will be available, or maybe the ground roast that will be available for local and export market. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks so much. So there's your answer by fair trade. All right, so one of the questions in the chat, which is an interesting one, is climate change affecting Arabica and Robusta equally? I don't know if Nico, from a research perspective, knows the answer to this. I mean, I know they're impacting, both of these varieties, but
all of these varieties have their own optimal climate conditions, but all the scenarios that we were mentioning are predicted to affect both Arabica and Robusta. Robusta is more sensible to temperatures, but in general, it is expected that climate affect both of those varieties.
Okay, great. All right, so the next question, and then I think we'll be able to get them all. There's only a couple more. Is what is your opinion on that other coffee beans other than Arabica and Robusta, such as forgotten beans, which can grow in warmer conditions, could help future-proof coffee production against climate change? So the question is, how much potential is there in these other coffee varieties? And I know that there's some ancient varieties, very old varieties that might be more suited to a warmer climate. Can anyone speak to this? Is there hope with this? Is it a solution?
Well, I'm not genetist, but maybe to explain the varieties a little bit, there's two main families, the Arabicas and the Robustas. But those are the families that we know that has been explored and produced and to a scale. But definitely there's a lot of heirlooms and wild species in bushes, especially in Ethiopia. But we need more science to understand how we can transform those wild species into more domesticated production systems. So that, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that there's significant gaps in how to understand the genetics and the behavior of those crops. And yes, you can produce with wild species, and probably the crop will have amazing taste, but it will be difficult to scale that out without the right understanding on how it will perform in the future. Now, based on the world of Arabicas, there's so many sub-varieties that is where most people have been experimenting. Try to make hybrids to understand more resistant varieties to some pest diseases and some climate conditions. And this is one of the strategies that people, organization has been promoted as one of the other climate adaptation practices. Understand the seeds and understand what seeds are more resistant to the different conditions of your microclimate, and also which one will give you the three elements, no? Quality in the final crop, resistance to pest diseases, and productivity.
And I just want to mention, Amanda, that recently some researchers from the UK working with communities in Sierra Leone rediscovered some varieties that apparently are climate resistant and also keep some quality properties. But even those areas that definitely has to be, continue that research on that aspect as well, also need to connect with the farmers aspect. So this is not about the sustainability of a plant. This is about the sustainability of a production system that involves communities. So even if you have those amazing rediscoveries that, by the way, comes from tradition and local knowledge as well, it is important to see how it's possible to implement those kind of transitions and what are the concrete mechanisms to facilitate and improve the ways as farmers can do it.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
thank you. And I think, go ahead.
Yes, I would say in Kenya, we have two varieties that have been produced by our Coffee Research Institute. And the two varieties are resistant to coffee berry disease and leaf rust. And just like Nicola has said, the issue is supporting the uptake of the skills and the knowledge, and to make sure that the supply is not interrupted. So we need to give a lot of support to the research institutes and as well to the producers, so that they take the skills, they take the new varieties, and then research to be done. What is the impact on quality? Maybe the new varieties will have. Thank you.
Okay, great. Unless anyone has anything to add, I think we're going to have to stop here. We're over time. So I just want to thank all of our panelists for their very insightful answers, and also to the audience for posing very good and very thoughtful questions. We've definitely covered a lot of ground in the past 60 minutes or so, but whether you're a coffee drinker or not, I hope you have at least, some appreciation now for the crop and its importance for livelihoods, and, especially for women. And I hope as well that you have a better understanding of how climate is affecting coffee, as well as the human rights that are at play within the sector, and what you might do, as a consumer to mitigate some of those challenges and support adaptation on multiple levels. So yeah, conversations like these are just super important, not just for raising awareness of the problem, like we have problems like climate change that confront coffee production and livelihoods, but they're also really important for sharing really good and evidence-based solutions to address these problems. And I hope you've learned a bit today about some of those from our panelists. So if you'd like to continue this conversation and remain in the loop with the developments, in the coffee climate space, you can head over to social media. You can follow Fair Trade and the IRI, or you can feel free to drop us an email. I know some of our panelists share their emails already. I'm happy to share mine in the chat as well. But other than that, everyone has a beautiful day and a weekend.
Thank you. Bye.